actually prefer to do whiteboards, so and more interactive. So if you guys want to, if anybody listening wants to jump in, ask a question while I'm talking, I welcome that. I like more conversational back and forth than kind of dictating a presentation. But you don't have to if you don't want to. So in general, cross-chain, omni-chain, multi-chain, however you call it, why do you need it, right? Why does it matter? In general, right, what the most valuable thing that in like, you know, smart contract-based applications on blockchains is the composability, right? Applications build on each other, add value to each other, boats all rise together, right? Applications get better when they can use each other. It's kind of been clear over the past few years, one chain cannot fill the needs of every single application. Some applications need high throughput, low cost for writing. Some need high security and don't care about the speed necessarily. Some need a lot more uptime. They all need have different requirements for what they're building. And so these applications end up being fragmented along with their users, and composability goes out the window with that. So when you have all these different blockchains, cross-chain messaging enables the reunification of these blockchains via asynchronous composability, which defragments those ecosystems, right? Which it kind of gives us close to what we want when we have a single chain, like the one chain where everybody can build on it and compose it with each other. So if we agree that we need cross-chain messaging, then we could just, you know, pick any messaging protocol and just find out how good it is or if it works, right? Does it matter? And the answer is no, right? Not all cross-chain messaging protocols are created equal. Over $2 billion, which is 60% of all the stolen funds have been stolen funds in the past year, have been from cross-chain bridge hacks, right? Listing a bunch here, and some of them have been hacked multiple times. So picking any cross-chain messaging protocol is a risk, right? It requires some due diligence and figuring out what, as a developer, as you're building, how are you going to choose between the 40 different protocols that are out there? And so I kind of break it down when you're thinking about security for cross-chain messaging into three real major risks. The first being client diversity. What I mean by that is, and I'll dive into it, but the number of, if there's a network that is moving messages between chains, are they all running the same piece of software or not? For smart contract protocol, then the second one, smart contract protocol upgrade risk. So if a cross-chain messaging protocol has upgradable contracts, then that is a major risk to the applications building on top of them. And then finally, the user application risk, where you, the developer, are building on top of a messaging protocol and you have a bug. So digging deeper into client diversity, before before Ethereum went to proof of stake, largely Geth was the only major validator, the major software that we would run their validators on. And if for some reason one of the Geth, because it was widely used and everybody would take the newest Geth software whenever it would come out, if a rogue developer was able to slip in a malicious attack, basically all of these validators would take that version of that malicious attack and essentially attack the network of Ethereum. Now this would be devastatingly bad for Ethereum at the time, but they would be able to recover from it. They could roll back to a previous state. It is not final, right? Because they own, it would be bad news for them, but it wouldn't be a death blow because they can all agree that whatever had happened since that bad malicious code was pushed, you could roll back to a previous version, ignore those blocks and move forward by essentially removing them, right? And rolling it back. Now, client diversity with cross-chain messaging and bridges. Now, you could have, a wide variety, right? 19 validators, 30 validators, whatever the validator set you have, right? You can flex and say, I'll go have these validators, they have it for cross-chain messaging protocol. But in general, they all run the same piece of software written by the parent company that created it. And so just like people who are running Geth node validators, they're not checking and now we have client diversity in Ethereum, but no one's checking that source code on a regular basis. They're just taking the updates. And so just like that, if they're the same validator set for a bridge or a cross-chain messaging protocol, will take the source code from the creative parent company. If developer was to push malicious code or bad code, though all of those validators would take that same piece of source code, and then money could be stolen, messages could be forged. And the problem here is you can't roll that back, right? When a message is forged to a layer 1 or a layer 2, you can't. The bridge can't call up the layer 1 or layer 2 and say, hey, can we roll that back? They have no control over those blockchains. And so everything that happens in cross-chain messaging is final, which means that client diversity is very important. It doesn't matter how many validators you have in a cross-chain messaging protocol if they're all running the same piece of software. If you have 19, 20, or whatever, 100 validators, they're running the same thing, it's almost equivalent to just having one validator. So it's something to think about on that side of things. And then the next thing is smart contract perceived security. This is kind of the smart contract upgradability side. When you think about a smart contract, the way I like to think about it is the longer it's been out and the more money it's secured, the more perceived security it has, right? It stood the test of time. That code has not been modified, and it's been securing millions, billions of dollars for X amount of time. The longer that happens, the more likely the more hardened you feel it is, and the stronger the protocol is. It's very unlikely there's a bug in Uniswap v2, right? Or v3 even at this point. And so because that contract cannot be upgraded, and the longer it's been out, the more secure it can be perceived as feeling. But when you have smart contracts that are upgradable, you reset that clock. So protocol upgrade happens, and you force everyone into accepting those upgrades, right? So for cross-chain messaging protocols, in general, a lot of them, or most of them, are upgradable. And they do this because they want to be able to accept the latest or push the latest and greatest technology, right? If you as a messaging protocol think you've nailed it right when you come out, and you think whatever it is now is perfect, then you have there's no ability for you to change it after the fact if you don't make it upgradable. So it's just a natural reaction and a natural approach to say, okay, well, since we're a protocol and we're constantly moving, pushing new fixes and want to be able to fix bugs, we need to be able to make our contracts upgradable and push those fixes to our users. But it's a double-edged sword. Being able to fix bugs means you can also introduce them. And so no matter how, if you've been securing billions of dollars for a year and then you push a new smart contract upgrade, you reset that clock. Whatever you did in the past doesn't really matter. That's a new code, no matter how much code has been changed. Even if it's one line can have a butterfly effect that creates some obscure bug that allows you to exploit the protocol and forge messaging. So how do you go about keeping a messaging protocol with the latest and greatest tech and still keep the old security that you had, right, without upgrading the smart contracts? And so a solution that we had come up with when LayerZero came out is something called library upgrades. And what we do is that every smart contract is permanent and immutable. We can't every validation library that we put out that cannot be changed by LayerZero Labs or anybody. No multi-sig. It's not upgradable. It's immutable. And what LayerZero can do is append new libraries that applications can opt into, but they don't have to accept it. So a Curve or Uniswap or anybody using a messaging LayerZero library that's been out for a year and a half and securing tens of billions of dollars, they can be sure that will be out there forever, and that LayerZero Labs can't change that. But we still have the ability to add new libraries that can get better gas. We have the ZK, light clients, and all these different libraries that can stand the test of time, with applications that want to be using the cutting edge tech. And after that, has stood the test of time and secured more money, applications can choose to adopt it over time if they want to. But the important thing when you're with the cross-chain messaging protocol here that we're doing is we're not forcing our will and having control over the messaging protocol that you are using, right? We can't reset the clock. We can't force you into anything, which we thought was really important from a security standpoint. When you are building an application on a layer 1, you're accepting, or layer 2, whatever chain you're building on, you're accepting the risk of and the security properties of that chain, and then the code that you wrote. So it really boils down to, like, if you trust your chain that you're building on, and then do you trust yourself as a developer? Did you did the audits? Do you think it's good? But when you throw in a cross-chain messaging protocol that is upgradable, and now you're putting in a call option to that protocol that may be secure today, but times might get tough in 5 years from now, and they may not be secure then, but you're very much locked into them when you're using them. Or if you chose LayerZero and you're using us, and if we had the ability to upgrade those smart contracts, we could upgrade them and forge messages. We could upgrade them and attack your protocol and steal assets, right? And that's what cross-chain messaging protocols that are upgradable have the ability to do. And so you're putting trust in a small group of people, not just the layer 1 or the layer 2 that you're building on board, but that team, and hope that that team is successful, because if it becomes unsuccessful, or if their security slips and a single dev goes rogue and does something bad to steal assets, you're at risk. And so we always built LayerZero and from a perspective of how can I make it so that nobody within the company of LayerZero Labs could hurt or affect any of its users, and that I personally, right, couldn't attack it, right? It's always trying to, how can I cut myself out of it so that applications are in charge of their own security and have their and aren't taking on additional risk of another team. And then the last one, which is a common one that happens in smart contract or cross-chain messaging protocol exploits, is smart contract risk of your application, of the user application building on top, right? The wormhole hack a year and a half ago, their smart contract, their bridge on top of wormhole had a bug in it, and allowed for someone to send a message that is incorrect and basically unlock funds on the other side on another chain. And it wasn't necessarily the off-chain infrastructure's bug. It wasn't their problem, but it still resulted in a major hack, right? And so anybody could building on a cross-chain messaging protocol could introduce could have a bug in there that ends up sending a message to another chain and destroying their application essentially. And so what we realized when we saw these hacks happening is the benefit of the asynchronous nature of cross-chain messaging is that there's a time window, because it's not atomic, that you could check invariants, things that are bad, and make sure that there was no hack that happened. And so what we came up with something called pre-crime. What pre-crime does is it allows smart applications that are building on top of LayerZero to define a set of invariants. These invariants could be, the total supply of my smart contract of my ERC20, right, is 1 billion tokens. I can never have more than 1 billion. If there's ever more than 1 billion between all the chains, do not deliver that message. That could be an invariant. There could be making sure that if I deduct some funds from one side, that I am only adding those exact funds on the other, right? And so being able to protect the user application from themselves, because we have that window, that asynchronous time. Between the message going between chains, it allows for you to do these extra level of security you could not do on a single chain in these checks. And so what we do is we fork all of the blockchains that are involved with that application off chain. We check it against the invariants by delivering the message to the fork chain. The invariants will will basically return true or false, essentially say if it failed or not. If it does fail, you don't deliver a message and you prevent a hack from ever happening. Hence the name pre-crime from, if you've seen Minority Report, it might be dating myself, but great movie, and essentially preventing those hacks. And so in general, we're always looking for ways to try to add security. LayerZero is a security, and how we build is a security-focused software team. Right? When we push new library code, new validation libraries, every time it takes us months to go live. Our last Yuan v2 was last September, which is one of our last major releases. We were done in I believe late May, and we took 2.5 months to do what we call I guess dry runs over and over and over again, and kind of like almost command center wise, right? We called it the dance, is what we name it, and we would go through this process of forking all the chains, deploying it all the chains, trying to attack it while we're deploying it all the chains, trying to figure out what could go wrong, make it go wrong, and how would we adapt to it as we're doing it. Because when you're putting new libraries on, when you're putting new things for applications to use, there's an asynchronous nature to it. I'm deploying on Ethereum and BNB chain and Avalanche and Aptos and all these chains at kind of the same time, but not really. What happens if someone tries to use it and sends a message to another one that doesn't have it deployed yet? How does all the things that could go wrong, we try to figure out how to do it and automate against it, and try to protect against it any way we can, within code, within off-chain scripts, within the whole dance of deploying. We take it very seriously, and this level of attention to detail and not rushing things, right? Taking months after code is ready, after audits, after multiple audits, to push things live, is we think is our responsibility as a messaging protocol to make sure that we're making, even though we can't affect existing users, but that we're always, because we can't upgrade their contracts, they have to opt into it. We still want everything to be perfect. There can't be any risk of forged messaging or us doing something bad to applications. Quick run through for those who don't know how it works. We have user applications. These are applications that are on each chain A and chain B that are building on top. Application interacts with something called an endpoint directly. User applications can send their messages directly, send and receive to this endpoint, which is just sending a bytes payload, receiving a bytes payload. You interpret it how you want. It's supposed to be completely easy for applications to interact with from a developer's standpoint. You pay the gas only on the source chain. You send it for the destination chain. It does the execution on the destination chain for you, making it a great user experience from the user application side of things. Applications select their own libraries. We call them ultralight node validation libraries. They select them, and they select the off-chain infrastructure. So for the original ultralight node, we have other validation libraries coming out, but for the original one, you select an Oracle. And Relayer, Oracle moves either I'll dive deeper, but they're moving different pieces of information between chains. But you select the validation libraries, and then these Oracle and Relayers are responsible for either moving a transaction hash and the transaction itself, or a block header and a transaction proof. Originally, it was the block header and transaction proof to allow for existing oracles could easily move public information like block headers. But we also have the actual transaction hash itself for newer oracles to reduce cost. So messages get sent from the user application to the endpoint directly through the validation library that they selected, but we have no ability to change on them. To the application, to the Oracle and Relayer set that they have chosen. You can choose multiple oracles and or Relayers. It is LayerZero gives the full flexibility of the application to define what their off-chain infrastructure looks like and who is allowed to participate in securing their message. This off-chain infrastructure is paid by the ultralight node based on a quote that was provided to it on chain. The oracles and relayers are then listening. They will then, after the selected block confirmations that the application has defined inside its endpoint, so it says, I want to wait 15 block confirmations or 100 blocks leaving the source chain before you move it, just in case there's a reorg. And so it waits those block confirmations. It will submit the block header or the transaction hash. The relayer will then move the transaction proof or the transaction itself. It is verified by the same validation library on the destination chain, and then delivered directly to the user application. This allows for the user application to have entire control over its entire security properties. It is in charge. It is my strong belief that there is no way to achieve from a customer standpoint, from users who are using the user application, from their standpoint, trustless communication. That is not possible. You are always going to be dependent on somebody. And so if you have to trust somebody as an application, as a developer building on it, my stance was I rather trust myself, the developer building on my own application, and not some third party, not LayerZero Labs, not some other messaging protocol. I want to be in charge. I want to be able to choose the off-chain infrastructure. I want to make sure that libraries cannot be upgraded on me. It was always built developer first standpoint of how do I protect against other parties from affecting my application, from affecting my business, from affecting my users. And so that is the LayerZero's stance, right? Give control to the application itself. When users are interacting with your application, they're not accepting risk from another protocol. They're only accepting risk from usually the team who built it. So in general, summarizing all of this is, client diversity, which I think is widely overlooked, but very important to think about in terms of how you deal choosing messaging protocols, like how many different how many different clients are being used, software clients, right? Who's writing this off the client? Because it's not just how many validators you have. If they're all running the same client, it's just one of one, right? So LayerZero stance, right? Like if you choose Chainlink, they wrote that entire client themselves, and LayerZero Labs wrote its own relayer, and other oracles and relayers are writing their own clients. So you stack them, each one has its own client, diversifying that client diversity, which gives you true diversity in terms of your validator set versus being dependent on one piece of software, because you are as only strong as your weakest link. And so it doesn't matter how many validators you have, if they're all running the same software, the weakest link is that software team that is writing that client. Smart contract protocol risk, upgrade risk, even if they are a diverse client set, if they can upgrade the contract, they have a call option on you forever. Whoever has the multi-sig to that smart contracts could push a bug with not intentional, right? The Nomad hack, they pushed some upgrade that thought would make the protocol better. But it allowed you to forge messaging. They overlooked by not doing negative testing and realized that, I could pass any message here and this will work. And that was not intentional, but it resulted in all of the applications on top of it getting negatively affected, and messages being forged, and funds hundreds of millions being stolen. And so having that power, when a messaging protocol can choose to upgrade it, gives them the ability to negatively affect you when you had nothing to do with that hack, nothing to do with those changes, and you don't get a choice. That just gets pushed on you whether you want it or not. And then your own risk, being able to write your own invariants to protect against your critical failure for cross-chain messaging. Because building cross-chain is far different than on a single chain. You don't have atomicity anymore. You have this asynchronous nature of messages being moved between chains, and it's a different building paradigm. Just like if you're building on a single CPU versus GPU programming, it's just a different way of thinking, and it's not common, and still, it's not the normal way people build applications, and bugs can be introduced because of that. And so having something like pre-crime that can protect you from yourself, and say, well, these are the if any of this stuff happens, I need an emergency brake. That is what pre-crime and things like pre-crime give you. So in the end, those are the things that we were trying to optimize for in terms of security and things we like to think about when building cross-chain. So that's it. Happy to answer questions in chat. I don't know, I was hearing some chat noise, but I don't know if that's just how Discord works. But happy to, is it talking or is it voice? Or
yeah, either way, whatever folks are comfortable with. I think usually, typically, people will throw in questions in the chat. So if you pop open into chat, you'll see Rusty Rabbit. He just asked a quick question. He's asked, can the application create and choose their own validation library? And there's some others as well if you pop that open.
Yeah. Yep. Right now, applications can choose their own, but they cannot create their own. We might open that up in the future, but right now, LayerZero Labs has the ability to add the validation libraries. The ones that are out there are very are as simple primitive as it gets in terms of how to add multiple oracles or relayers or off-chain infrastructure. For example, Polyhedra added their ZK Lite client on an existing validation library with the Featherproof one that we have out there, which is a core primitive and simple part that you could build anything on top of, essentially, including like they did with their ZK Lite client. So it already has that kind of flexibility and risk reduction within it. And then what's the next one?
The next one, is asking, what are the most common errors in code bases with LayerZero implementations you observe resulting in availability, usability, or security issues?
Yeah. So in general, I think some of the most common ones are that LayerZero requires is more of a setup problem. LayerZero gives applications define their own gas to be used on the other side. So I'm sending applications that I want to send and execute this message on a destination chain, and I want to use 250,000 gas. But they needed 300,000 gas, and so now it gets stuck, and then they get in this bad experience where they have to go manually unstick it because you're paying the relayer to execute it, and they're not giving uncapped gas, right? They're giving the 250 you paid for. If you need more than that, it reverts and then saves it on chain for you so that you can run it again, but it's stored, which means that the applications are put in this bad experience where they have to go and unstick it. And so it's about making sure that applications give the proper, making sure that when they're testing, that they're making sure there's enough gas that they're sending. Other ones are if they can, when they're interacting with other contracts, so when they're sending an application, they're sending a message to another chain, do they then call another smart contract, and making sure that they're not blindly calling another smart contract without any reentrancy guards. Basically, general things that you would see on a atomic transaction on a normal single blockchain message. But these things happen in within LayerZero as well, where people will kind of overlook, what happens when I call another smart contract? Could there be a reentrancy issue? Could that smart contract spin and use too much gas and then make me have to block, and I have to add more gas back in and pay for it, right? Making sure they're thinking about the gas that anything else they call might use. And so it's more of I think the setup and testing and making sure they've covered all their corner cases of what they would need to send on the other side is probably the most common thing we see. Who set the invariance? The applications set the invariance for pre-crime. So if you're building on LayerZero, right now we've been giving applications, it's on-chain invariance. So you write it in the smart contract that you're in. We're putting the docs up in a couple of weeks probably, but we teams that ask for it, we share it with them. We basically don't like to put anything up live and in for people to use unless it's perfect or in a state that's very easy for them. So we kind of test it with the applications that come to us in person or message us and say, hey, I want pre-crime. We show them how to do it, learn like, were these docs, were these instructions good enough? And what can we do to make them better? And that's kind of how we beta test our docs before they go live. But the way you set the invariants is that you would write them yourself and define them on chain. And then we would call a view function that would pass the information and return true or false, essentially. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's it on the questions from chat. I'll give it a few seconds or so. If anybody has anything else they want to ask, either via voice or through the chat, please feel free to just give it a little bit. Going once, going twice. Okay, awesome. Well, again, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to present today. A lot of really solid information here. Really appreciate you coming over. And yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and conclude. And thank you all for coming, and thank you, Ryan, for presenting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Take care.